There are a couple of really interesting developments in the immersive audio production space over the summer, and we're going to talk about a couple of those today. We're going to talk about the update to the SkyDust 3D synth from Sound Particles. We're going to talk about a spectacular new plugin from Brewers. And believe it or not, we're going to talk about Pro Tools. So let's get started. But first of all, hello everybody. In case you're new here, my name is Michael Wagner. I'm a digital media educator with more than 30 years of experience in higher education. And on this channel, I talk about digital media, game design, and spatial audio. Today about a couple of really interesting news in immersive audio. If any of those things interest you, I invite you to subscribe or join our Discord community. Invite link is in the description below, or there's also a QR code here somewhere. Couple of things before I start. First of all, I'm going to talk about a number of different things today, and in order to make your life easier, there are time codes in the video. So if you want to jump ahead, or you want to jump back, or you want to jump back and forth, you can do that by following the links below. However, be aware that I have decided to create a story arc. So there is actually an entire storytelling going on today. We are going to go through one particular project, and we're going to cover all the different things with this one project. Secondly, a couple of plugins that I'm going to use today have been provided to me for free, so be aware of that. However, this is not a sponsored video. There was no money involved and nobody has any influence on this video. Everything I'm going to talk about is strictly my own opinion and nobody has seen this video before its release. And with that being said, let's hop into Pro Tools. Now, this is actually the first video I'm doing with Pro Tools, and you might wonder why Pro Tools. It has come under a lot of critique over the last couple of years for not being particularly innovative with the development of Pro Tools. However, in my opinion, that has changed over the last couple of months, a little bit at least. We've seen a lot of really interesting developments that were put into Pro Tools, most noticeably one that is actually coming up, which is called Pro Tools Sketch, which is Arvid's first attempt into creating something that is a non-linear arrangement editing tool, similar to what Ableton is doing, which I think is really interesting. And in their latest release, which happened before the summer, I believe it was in June, they also added a couple of new features to Pro Tools that are really useful for immersive audio. In particular, they added a couple of new track layouts that are specifically targeted at Dolby Atmos production. Now, in order to access these new track features, let's add a new track to our empty Pro Tools project. And in the drop-down menu where you select the channel count, you now have a number of additional options that were previously not available to you. If you're working with Pro Tools Ultimate, it goes up to 9.1.6. If you're working with Pro Tools Studio, I believe it goes only up to 7.1.4, if I'm not completely mistaken, but don't quote me on that. However, there are a couple of new options that are really useful for Dolby Atmos. Now, you might wonder why that actually is such a big deal, because if you think about it, in Dolby Atmos, all you ever have is 7.1.2, because that is the maximum channel count for a Dolby Atmos bed. So why is it such a big deal to have higher channel counts? Well, there are really two reasons for that. The first reason is that a lot of producers got frustrated by the fact that you are limited to 7.1.2 in the Dolby Atmos bed. The reason for that is very, very simple. 7.1.2 is not really fully immersive. In order to be fully immersive, you would have to have at least 4 overhead speakers. And with 7.1.2, you only have 2. So it's not really immersive. Now, in order to overcome that, what many people have started to do is they have added additional objects to add additional speakers, additional overhead speakers to the Dolby Atmos bed. Sometimes this is even put into the workflow. So if you're working with the Fiedler Audio Dolby Atmos Composer, for example, they've introduced the concept of composites, and a composite is exactly that. So you essentially have 7.1.2 speaker layout as the Dolby Atmos bed, and then you're adding additional objects that make up for the speakers that are missing. Now, Pro Tools kind of followed up on that and created workflows that now allow you to use beds with higher channel counts in the very same way that the Fiedler Audio Dolby Atmos Composer works. So you would have essentially 7.1.2 as the main bed, and then you would have additional speakers or kind of speaker objects really to make up for the speakers that are missing in the bed. And so for that, you essentially now have the option to use Dolby Atmos beds with channel counts up to 9.1.6. The second reason is even more interesting, and that is in the workflow with the external Dolby Atmos renderer, in particular the re-render option in the external Dolby Atmos renderer. The way this works right now is that if you, for example, want to re-render the Dolby Atmos output in a 7.1.4 or 9.1.6, for example, you would have to do that through the external Dolby Atmos renders. You would go into Dolby Atmos render, make the settings there, and then essentially export the audio from the external Dolby Atmos renderer. With Pro Tools, you now can route that audio from the external Dolby Atmos renderer back into Pro Tools and render those re-render streams directly in Pro Tools. And this greatly improves the efficiency of that workflow because you no longer have to go out into the external Dolby Atmos renderer. You can do everything from within Pro Tools. And in order to be able to do that, there are a couple of things that are necessary, but one of those things is that you have actually track layouts that can use that re-render stream, or that can catch those re-render streams and kind of route the re-renders through Pro Tools in order for that to be exported through Pro Tools. Now, in this particular video, I'm not going to talk too much about Dolby Atmos. This is actually something that I plan to do in a future video, more than one future videos actually. I'm going to talk about how to get started with Dolby Atmos in Pro Tools, how to do the re-render option. I'm also going to talk a little bit about how to do head tracking in Pro Tools, which I think these are all really, really interesting kind of features that Pro Tools has. If you're interested in these types of topics, please don't forget to subscribe and maybe also push the notification button. What I'm interested today is primarily here down in the Ambisonics section, because Pro Tools Ultimate, and this once again is only for Pro Tools Ultimate. If you have the Pro Tools Studio version, there's no change in the Ambisonics settings. But if you're using Pro Tools Ultimate, you now have the option to go up to 7th order Ambisonics. And this is actually quite significant because the only other DAW that could do that so far was Reaper. So Pro Tools became the second DAW, only the second DAW, that is capable of going up to 7th order Ambisonics. And this is what we're going to use today, because all of the plugins that I want to talk about today are really Ambisonics plugins, or at least Ambisonics capable plugins. So let's add an Ambisonics track. Now, the first plugin that I'm going to talk about is SkyDust. And while SkyDust is capable of outputting to Ambisonics, it can only go up to 6th order Ambisonics. So even though it would be the natural thing to do to select the highest option available to me, which is 7th order, I'm going to select a 6th order Ambisonics track here, and this is primarily because I want to use SkyDust, and once again SkyDust only goes up to 6th order. So let's select a 6th order Ambisonics track. We want to use an instrument, so let's use an instruments track here, and let's push create. And this now gives me an instrument track that is 6th order Ambisonics, and I can now insert SkyDust. So let's do that. So in the instrument section of the multi-channel plugins, I now have SkyDust 3D, and this essentially is now outputting in 6th order. Now, before I get into the details about what is new in SkyDust, let's first complete the Ambisonics setup, because currently, even if we would play that synth, we wouldn't hear anything because we cannot hear Ambisonics audio directly. We first need to convert it back into channel-based audio. Now, the standard way to do that in Pro Tools is to add a bus and use that bus for converting Ambisonics into channel-based audio. So let's do that. So let's first go into the setup section in order to set up a 6th order Ambisonics bus. And let me close that here. I don't need that. So in the setup section, in the setup menu, I go into input-output settings, and in the input-output settings, I go to the bus section, and I'm going to add a new path. And this new path is going to be a 6th order Ambisonics bus. And let's give that a name. Let's call it 6th order Ambisonics. And let's push create here. And let's say OK. And then I'm going to add an aux track that is a 6th order Ambisonics aux track. So let's add a new track, and let's make that a 6th order Ambisonics. And let's make that an aux input track, and let's push. Let's give it a name as well. Let's call it 6th order Ambisonics as well. That's fine. Let's push create here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to route the audio from the instrument track into the 6th order Ambisonics bus. And then this auxiliary track is going to take in the 6th order Ambisonics, and currently it is sending out to the bus again. So it's just monitoring. Now, what I want to do is I want to convert that into something that I can actually hear. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to convert that into stereo and or binaural. Now, in order to convert that into a channel-based layout, I would need a plugin that can actually take in Ambisonics and then essentially kind of convert that or decode that into a channel-based layout like stereo or binaural, for example. And unfortunately, there aren't really that many options for Pro Tools. If you would work with Reaper, the logical options would be, for example, the IEM plugin suite or the Sparta plugin suite. I'm going to leave links in the description below in case you're interested. But on Pro Tools, those don't work because they are not available in the AAX Pro Tools plugin format. So those kind of are not options that we can use. There is the third option that is very popular, which is the Blue Ripple sound plugins. Those would be available in AAX. However, they only go up to third order. So that is out as well. But fortunately, there are actually two additional options. And one of them I've never talked before on this channel. And those are the SSA plugins. Now, the SSA plugins have been around for quite some time. They're actually more than a decade old. And they're actually really, really good. They have been developed by a very capable developer. And the reason I never talked about them on this particular channel is primarily because they're actually quite expensive. So if you essentially go into the shop, you will actually see that the plugin bundle costs up to 450 euros. This is actually already a pretty big price reduction. They used to be much more expensive than that. But what they did over the last couple of weeks is that they updated their plugin to work with Pro Tools, in particular with the new track width feature in Pro Tools. And that essentially means that we can now actually use them. Now, there's one additional thing that I want to briefly mention, and that's something that's going to come up in a future video. This is actually also the only plugin suite that I can use in order to enable head tracking in Pro Tools. So if you're interested in monitoring binaurally with head tracking, this is the only option that you have. Now, for our purpose, what we really need is we just need the monitor. That is essentially a plugin that converts higher order Ambisonics into binaural or stereo. And this is what we're going to use. So let's go back to our Pro Tools project and let's add an instance of AX monitor so that we can hear in stereo. So I don't really need this here anymore. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a plugin instance to the auxiliary track here. So this auxiliary track really is responsible for converting 6th order Ambisonics into stereo right now, or binaural. So I'm going to add a multi-channel plugin here. It's a sound field plugin, and here we have the A7 monitor. Now, one thing that I didn't mention is that if you purchase the SSA plugins, you actually need to decide if you purchase them for 3rd order, 5th order, 7th order. They come at different prices. Obviously, if you purchase the 7th order plugins, they work for everything up to 7, so you don't have to purchase all 3 of them. You just kind of purchase the highest kind of order that you intend to use. In our case, we are working with 6th order Ambisonics, so we need the A7 monitor. So let's add that here. And once that is set here, the last thing that I need to do is I need to route that auxiliary track or that bus into the output. And in my particular case, it is the regular audio output. And I probably also need to put on my headphones in order to hear something. And then let's open up SkyDust. And let's choose a particular setup or preset. Let's do this one here. And then essentially we have recording enabled. And let's see if we hear something. And what is happening now is that the plugin, the SkyDust 3D, is producing 6th order Ambisonics, and we see here the individual channels. I probably need to kind of put that here kind of to the side. So we see here the output, 6th order, and this is then kind of routed into the bus, into the auxiliary track, and in the auxiliary track it is then converted into binaural through the A7 monitor. Now, this is one option, and as I said before, this is the only option that you have if you're interested in head tracking. The SSA plugins have a workflow that allow you to work with a head tracker so that you have head tracked binaural audio. The setup is a little bit more complex. I'm going to cover that in a future video. Once again, if you're interested, don't forget to press the subscribe button. However, if all you want to do is monitor your audio in a channel-based format, so for example with headphones or in a speaker layout, for example 7.1.4 speaker layout or 9.1.6 speaker layout, then you have a second option. And for those of you who have been following my channel for a while, you know what's coming now, and that is the Audio Brewers decoder. In my personal opinion, some of the best, probably the best piece of software that you can have if you're working with Ambisonics audio. So let's switch over to the Audio Brewers decoder. So let's first close SkyDust again, and then I'm going to remove the A7 monitor here. And I'm going to replace that with the Audio Brewers decoder. So let's go into the sound fill options. And here we have the Audio Brewers decoder. And as you can see, you have a couple of different options because the Audio Brewers decoder is not only able to convert or to decode into stereo or binaural, it can also decode in all kinds of channel layouts. So if you're working in an Atmos studio, for example, and you have a 7.1.4 speaker layout, you can use the Audio Brewers decoder to convert that into that 7.1.4 speaker layout. And in order to show you how that would actually work, this is what I'm going to do now. So instead of converting it into stereo directly, I'm going to convert it into 7.1.4. And then I need to convert that back to stereo because I don't really have a 7.1.4 speaker layout here. So this is just for demonstration purposes. So for me to actually hear that, I actually need to convert that back down to stereo. So I have this one additional step, but this once again would not be necessary if you actually have a 7.1.4 speaker layout around you. In order to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to, first of all, convert that back into 7.1.4. And for that, I need to set up an additional bus. So let's add one more bus here and let's make that a 7.1.4 bus. Let's call that 7.1.4. Press create here. Let's press OK. And then we're going to add an additional aux input track. So let's create a new track here. Let's make that a 7.1.4 track. Let's make that an aux track. And let's once again call that 7.1.4. And then I'm going to route the converted audio from the Audio Brewers decoder, which is now a 7.1.4 format, into this new 7.1.4 bus. And in the bus, I'm going to kind of take that signal and I'm essentially going to convert it. So now I need to convert that because once again, if you would have like a speaker layout that is 7.1.4, obviously this would be just your output and you would essentially kind of send that to the particular output. In my particular case, I'm listening with headphones. I need to convert that down from 7.1.4 to essentially to stereo. And the plugin that I'm going to use for that particular purpose is 3DX. And 3DX is from NovoNotes. Once again, links in the description below. And this is another plugin that has been updated to work with the track layout feature in Pro Tools. So let's add that here. So let's add another multi-channel plugin. It's a sound fill plugin, and we have a 3DX, and we want to convert that from 7.1.4 to stereo. Now, the main difference in the plugins is that with 3DX, it doesn't actually kind of automatically kind of set everything up. So if you just open it up, it keeps it at mono. So you need to switch that over to 7.1.4. Where are we? A little bit difficult to find. Here we are, 7.1.4. And we're going to kind of send it into binaural. So that's fine. And then let's the last thing I need to do is I need to kind of send it to my standard output. So let's kind of send it out into the, where are we? Into the output. And then let's see if we are still getting something. So as you can see, we have now converted from the output, which is 6th order Ambisonics, sent it through the 6th order Ambisonics track, converted it down to 7.1.4. Once again, if you would work in a 7.1.4 studio, you would just send it to your speakers. In my particular case, I'm converted it in one additional step from 7.1.4 to stereo, or kind of to be exact, in binaural. Now, the nice thing about the Audio Brewers decoder is that you can actually see exactly what's going on. So let's open up the Audio Brewers decoder and let's just keep that window alive here. And then let's go back to SkyDust. Here we have SkyDust, and let's see. So let's play it again. And as you can see, you now have the input, and this is converting the 6th order Ambisonics signal into a 7.1.4 signal. And once again, this is a spectacularly useful decoder. It can essentially convert into any channel-based format as you like, and it can take in anything up to 7th order Ambisonics. Now, you might wonder about the CPU load. There's actually a lot of things going on if you think about it. We have a 6th order Ambisonics signal, which has a lot of channels, and we actually have a lot of sound sources going on simultaneously. So there are a lot of channels flowing around, and I'm working with a MacBook Air, and it has no issues kind of running that without. So it's essentially no bottlenecking here. Everything is running just fine. So now that we have set everything up, let's talk about SkyDust and what's new in SkyDust. And the feature that they have added into SkyDust is something that I felt was actually missing at the very beginning. When I originally kind of worked with the pre-release version of SkyDust, this was actually something that I told them would be really important. And they finally added to that, and that is we can now load samples into SkyDust. So in order to see how that works, let's go back into our Pro Tools project. Now, the first thing that I'm going to do here is I'm going to close down the Audio Brewers decoder. I don't need that anymore, at least not for the moment. And let's bring that a little bit into the center here. And in order to demonstrate the capabilities of loading samples, I'm going to first select the init patch, which essentially is just a sine wave. So I'm now playing a note. I'm essentially just hearing a sine wave, which is located right in front of me. So it is centered in ahead of me. And if I go into the oscillator section, where I select what type of waveform I want to have, I now can load in an external waveform. So let's do that. Now, first of all, let's talk briefly about the additional options that you have. In the previous versions of SkyDust, you had a limited number of different waveforms, but they added additional waveforms to the mix, and you now really have almost something like a waveform synth that is added into SkyDust, which is really nice. But this is not what we are interested in. We are really interested in importing an external audio file, and this is this kind of little kind of selection here. So I'm going to say import audio file, and then I'm going to select one, and I put it on my desktop here actually. That is a loop that I used in some of my previous projects, and let's just open that up. And I now have that loop loaded into SkyDust, and let's play that. So let's maybe kind of increase the gain slightly. Now, there are a couple of different options that you have. First of all, has to do with the pitch. So in the way it is loaded in, it is currently adjusting the pitch to what note is played. So if I'm playing it on the C, for example, if I go like one octave higher, I'm getting a higher pitch. Now, the way this is pitched is by just kind of changing the speed of the sample, but for most of the simpler samples, this is just fine. However, if you don't want to do that, if I just want to trigger the sample itself, I can actually do that by selecting here unpitch, and that essentially means that regardless of what note I press, I'm getting the same pitch. There are a couple of additional options here. I can select whether I want to kind of play that only once, so I should loop, and then I can also select to go backward and forward. So there are a couple of different options. Obviously, for a sample like this, you would normally have it just play once. So we can now do everything that we used to be able to do only with the built-in waveforms, also with this loaded-in waveforms. So the most important thing, obviously, we can move them around in three-dimensional space. So let's go into the spatial section for that, and let's maybe select the movement modifier. Let's kind of make a circle movement, and let's give it a little bit of speed in terms of the azimove. Not doing kind of anything with the elevation here. And if I'm now playing the note, it should just move around me. And if I want to kind of also move it upwards, I can also maybe select a little bit kind of movement into elevation direction, and that will essentially kind of circle it around me and kind of upwards. So now it's on top. Now you can obviously combine that with everything that you were able to do with SkyDust before. So if you have additional objects that are floating around, you can kind of combine them. You have the FM sections, you have all kinds of things that you can do. And this is obviously super kind of interesting because this makes this almost like a spatial audio workstation by itself. So it's no longer only a synth, it's also a sampler. It's an entire spatial audio workstation, as I said, and it can do anything that you, for example, could do with Dolby Atmos. The only difference, obviously, is that it folds everything down to either Ambisonics or some channel-based audio, but the entire spatial capabilities that you have in there are very, very similar to what you have in any other spatial audio workstation. Now, this is already pretty cool, but the next plugin I want to show you, I think, is fairly spectacular. Now, to set everything up, let's switch back to a standard preset of SkyDust. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use, I think this one was nice. That's Invade, that's a bass. Let's just check out how that sounds. And what I want to do is I want to do some pitch shifting. And the way I'm going to do that is with a new plugin from Audio Brewers that essentially allows you to shift pitches in different areas of your three-dimensional sound field differently. And that actually gives some really, really interesting effects. Now, Audio Brewers calls these types of plugins impressionist plugins. That is because they are kind of really fairly creative and they are not that straightforward to use, so you need to play around with them. They're primarily probably meant for sound designers who kind of can create all kinds of weird things with those things. But be aware that this is a plugin that has a lot of capabilities and you need to really kind of spend some time with the plugin in order to really get it to its fullest potential. Now, I originally wanted to do an entire video just for this plugin alone, but then I noticed that Audio Brewers has an excellent video on their YouTube channel that explains exactly what the plugin is capable of. They do it in a way that is much better than I ever could. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to just do a tutorial about that particular plugin. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just kind of show you some basics, and then I am really asking you to switch over to the YouTube channel from Audio Brewers. I'm going to leave links everywhere it's possible, and watch the videos. Obviously, also please subscribe to their channel. They have excellent tutorials about everything that they do, and kind of their plugins are currently, at least, the most innovative plugins that you will find in the immersive audio space. So let's add an instance of the Audio Brewers pitch shifting plugin to our setup. Now, as all of the Audio Brewers plugins, this is an Ambisonics plugin. It works with Ambisonics of orders up to 7, so it is perfectly fine for what we are doing here. And most importantly, it is also working with the latest iteration of Pro Tools, so it kind of has all the capabilities that you need for being compatible with the track width feature in Pro Tools. So let's do that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to close SkyDust here for a second, and I need to add that to the 6th order Ambisonics auxiliary track, and for that I'm going to kind of move the decoder down here a little so that I have a little bit of space here, and then I'm going to add a pitch shifting plugin here, so it shows up as a pitch shifter. And here we have a couple of different options. It comes in 2 different versions. One that is called PitchPad, which is a simplified version that is kind of for people who are really interested in kind of using it more creatively. And then the actual pitch shifter, oopsie, here we are. The actual pitch shifter, which has all the individual kind of controls exposed, so it's you can do a lot more fine tuning with that particular plugin. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use the pitch shifter here, and I want to have it just in 6th order. So we're starting with 6th order and we're ending with 6th order. So let's just add that here, and it's opening up. And if you have any familiarity with the Audio Brewers plugins, you already know what's going on here. This is a plugin that allows you to pitch shift. And in addition to just being able to shift the pitch of the entire signal, it also allows you to split that up into the individual components. So you can shift the pitch of the side components, left, right. You can pitch the shift of front, back, and top, bottom. And that essentially allows you to do all kinds of weird things. You can pitch them independently, so you can pitch them on one side higher and the other side lower and things like that. But enough said, let's just play around with it. So what I'm going to do is let's open up, let's keep the window open here, and let's open up SkyDust again. So let's play around with it a little. So first of all, let's play our node again. Now, the plugin obviously is a pitch shifter, so you can shift the pitch. Like 3 semitones, or maybe 12 semitones. Now it has this very interesting viscosity setting here, and that essentially allows you to change the speed with which it actually shifts the pitch. So if I'm setting the viscosity settings to 100%, for example, and I'm now playing the synth, and I'm now kind of changing the pitch rapidly. So let's say, for example, I'm just kind of moving it up 24 semitones instantly. You actually see how it ramps up. And the same thing goes obviously also if I'm kind of moving down. So you have all kinds of weird effects that it can do with that. As I said before, you can now split up the individual components. So you can split up the sides, the left, right side, the front, back, the top, bottom. So let's do that. Let's maybe kind of shift the sides differently. So let's maybe, and we can kind of either shift them together or we can also separate that. So let's say, for example, I want to shift the left side down an octave and the right side up an octave. So let's see how that sounds. So let's maybe kind of change the gain a little. So in order to kind of demonstrate the difference, let me just bypass the plugin. So this is with the pitch shifting. This is bypassed. Now we can do the same thing with front and back and top and bottom. Now, because I'm listening to it in binaural, that is not going to have such an kind of intense effect, but still, kind of let's maybe kind of do the front. I don't know, maybe let's go like 3 semitones lower in the front and like maybe, I don't know, 5 semitones higher in the back. Does this sound good? Let's see. We can obviously shift everything. So it can get very weird. I can do the same thing with top bottom, and I also have the option of having an additional kind of the mono channel really, so I can shift that pitch as well. But there's one additional control here that I think is really interesting, and that is this tension knob here. And the way they explain it is that you have to think of it like the tension that you have on a guitar string. So if you increase the tension, it will actually change the way kind of the pitch is shifted. So let's kind of just play around with that a little. So if we reduce the tension or increase the tension. So as you can see, this is primarily meant for sound designers. That this is something that you can get very, very creative. And I think the term that they use, Impressionism plugin, is really kind of very suitable because it allows you to really mangle the sound in all kinds of ways that you cannot really do with any other plugin. And it can create sounds that no other plugin can really create. And that's really cool. And I would hope that there are more plugins of this type for immersive audio, because one thing that's, I think at least it's currently missing in the immersive audio space are creative plugins. We have a lot of plugins that are trying to recreate things in a very natural way, that are trying to be as kind of realistic as possible, that are kind of trying to get you the binaural rendering in the most realistic way. But we don't really have a lot of plugins that are trying to utilize the three-dimensional audio in a way that is creative and that just plays around with it and kind of mangles it in a way that creates interesting and new results. But this is really everything I wanted to say today. Thanks again for watching my videos. I really appreciate it. As I said at the very beginning, I plan to do a couple of videos on Pro Tools and how to use Pro Tools in an immersive audio production environment, particularly with respect to Dolby Atmos, because I do believe that Pro Tools has a couple of really interesting new features that not a lot of people are talking about. If that is something that interests you, don't forget to press the subscribe button and maybe also the notification bell so that you are informed whenever I put up a new video. And if you have any questions or comments, please use the comment section below. I once again join our Discord community. That link is in the description below. And with that being said, see you at the next video.